The dust storm had barely settled when Virginia Nelson spotted the lone silhouette approaching her family's makeshift camp, her heart racing with both fear and desperate hope. 3 months of living in a canvas tent on the unforgiving plains of Wyoming Territory had taught her that strangers could be either salvation or damnation, and with 3 hungry children depending on her, she couldn't afford to guess wrong. It was the summer of 1873, and the promises of a new life out west had turned to bitter disappointment for Virginia. At 26, she found herself widowed after her husband Thomas had succumbed to fever just 2 weeks after they'd reached Sweetwater County. With their savings nearly depleted and no family to turn to, she'd been forced to make camp on unclaimed land outside the growing town of Green River. "Mama, someone's coming," whispered 8-year-old Eliza, the eldest of Virginia's children, clutching her mother's skirt as they both squinted into the setting sun. "I see him," Virginia replied quietly, instinctively placing herself between the approaching rider and her children. She reached for the small revolver tucked into the pocket of her apron, the last gift Thomas had given her before his passing. "Emma, take Samuel and go inside the tent." 6-year-old Emma obeyed without question, grabbing her 4-year-old brother's hand and disappearing behind the canvas flap. Virginia stood her ground as the rider drew closer, the distinctive silhouette of a wide-brimmed hat marking him as a cowboy. The man slowed his chestnut mare to a walk as he approached, raising one hand in greeting. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice carrying on the wind. "Mean no harm." Virginia's fingers remained wrapped around the revolver, but she nodded in acknowledgement. "State your business, sir." The stranger pulled his horse to a stop about 20 paces from her tent. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and a dark beard trimmed close to his jaw. His clothes were dusty but well kept, and the Winchester rifle in his saddle holster was polished to a shine. "Name's Wade Lawson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Foreman over at the Broken Spoke Ranch. Couldn't help but notice your camp here on my ride back to the property." His eyes moved from Virginia to the tent behind her, which rippled in the evening breeze. "Been seeing smoke from your fire these past few days. Thought I should check if you're in need of assistance." "We're managing just fine," Virginia answered, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. The truth was, they weren't managing at all. Their food supplies were dwindling, and the autumn nights were growing colder. Wade Lawson dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Begging your pardon, madam, but 3 little ones in a tent with winter coming isn't what I'd call managing." Virginia stiffened. "My husband will be returning shortly with supplies. We're just waiting on him." The cowboy's eyes softened with something that looked dangerously like pity. "No disrespect intended, madam, but I've been riding past for nearly a month now. Haven't seen any man around here except that little boy who peeks out of the tent." Virginia felt heat rising to her cheeks. She hadn't realized they'd been observed for so long. "My arrangements are not your concern, Mr. Lawson." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but I wouldn't sleep right knowing there are children out here with the first frost due any day now." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "Storm's coming too." "Looks to be a bad one." As if to confirm his words, a gust of wind swept through the camp, nearly uprooting one of the tent's stakes. Virginia instinctively moved to secure it, momentarily taking her hand from the revolver. "Let me help," Wade said, quickly stepping forward to drive the stake back into the ground. His hands were calloused but gentle as he worked, and Virginia found herself watching him with cautious interest. "Thank you," she said stiffly when he'd finished. Wade straightened up, dusting off his hands on his denim pants. "Mrs. Nelson, Virginia Nelson. Mrs. Nelson, I don't mean to press, but my employer's got an empty foreman's cabin about a mile from here. It's not much, but it's sturdy, got a proper stove, and no one's using it since I bunk with the other hands." He looked at her directly, his blue eyes earnest. "You'll sleep under a roof tonight, you and your children." Virginia felt a lump form in her throat. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain the fragile independence she'd clung to since Thomas's death. But another part, the mother in her, knew she couldn't subject her children to another night in the increasingly frigid tent, especially with a storm approaching. "Why would you help us?" She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know us." Wade's gaze drifted to the horizon for a moment. "My own mother raised me and my sisters alone after my pa was killed in a mining accident. I know what it's like." He looked back at her. "Sometimes folks just need a helping hand." The first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against the canvas. Virginia heard Emma's worried voice from inside the tent. "Mama, it's leaking again." Wade raised an eyebrow. "What do you say, Mrs. Nelson? I promise you'll be safe." Virginia looked at the tent, where a small puddle was already forming near the entrance. She thought of her children, of the nights they'd gone to bed hungry, of Emma's cough that had developed over the past week. Then she looked at Wade Lawson with his honest face and steady hands. "We don't have much, but I can pay something for rent," she said finally. Wade shook his head. "Let's just get you settled first. We can talk terms later." He glanced at the tent. "Do you have much to pack?" "Just what you see," Virginia admitted. "Our wagon broke an axle 2 weeks ago. I had to sell most of our belongings to feed the children." Wade nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "I've got room for your things on my horse, and the children can ride too. It's not far." Within minutes, Virginia had gathered their meager possessions: clothing, cooking utensils, a family Bible, and a small box containing Thomas's pocket watch and her wedding band, which she'd been too proud to sell. Wade secured the bundles to his saddle with practiced efficiency, then helped Emma and Samuel onto the horse. Eliza insisted on walking alongside her mother. The rain was falling steadily now, turning the ground to mud that clung to Virginia's worn boots. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and took a last look at the tent that had been their home for the past months. Despite its inadequacies, abandoning it felt like admitting defeat. "We can come back for it tomorrow if you'd like," Wade said, seeming to read her thoughts. Virginia shook her head. "No, there's nothing there worth saving." They set off through the gathering storm, Wade leading his horse while Virginia walked beside him, Eliza's hand clasped firmly in hers. The wind whipped at their clothes, and by the time the outline of the foreman's cabin came into view, they were all thoroughly soaked. The cabin was small but solid, nestled in a grove of cottonwoods that offered some protection from the elements. Wade hurried ahead to unlock the door, then helped the children down from his horse. "Go on in," he told Virginia. "I'll bring your things." The interior was simple but clean: a main room with a stone fireplace and small kitchen area, and a single bedroom visible through an open door. A sturdy wooden table with 4 chairs stood in the center of the main room, and a rocking chair was positioned near the fireplace. It wasn't grand, but to Virginia it looked like a palace. Wade entered behind her, carrying their belongings. "Let me get a fire going," he said, setting the bundles down and moving to the fireplace where kindling and logs were already stacked. "There are some dry clothes in the chest in the bedroom. They belonged to the previous foreman's wife, but they should fit you well enough. And I think there are some old clothes of their boy that might work for your little ones." Virginia stood dripping on the plank floor, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. "Mr. Lawson, I don't know how to thank you." Wade glanced up from where he was arranging logs in the fireplace. "No need for thanks, just doing what's right." He struck a match and the kindling caught immediately. "There's a pump out back for water, and the pantry's stocked with some basics: flour, beans, coffee. Should tide you over till morning when I can bring more supplies." "You've already done too much," Virginia protested. Wade straightened up, the fire beginning to crackle behind him. "Mrs. Nelson, you look like you haven't had a proper meal in weeks. Let me help." Virginia opened her mouth to argue, but at that moment, her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. She flushed with embarrassment. Wade smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I'll take that as agreement. Now, why don't you get the little ones dried off while I put some coffee on?" That night, after a simple but filling meal of beans and cornbread, Virginia sat by the fire watching her children sleep peacefully on a pallet of blankets Wade had arranged for them. Their faces were relaxed in slumber, free from the worry that had marked them for too long. Wade had excused himself after dinner, saying he needed to report back to the ranch, but promised to return in the morning with more supplies. Virginia found herself both relieved and strangely disappointed by his departure. There was something comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel secure for the first time since Thomas's death. As she rocked in the chair by the fire, Virginia allowed herself to weep quietly, not from despair, but from the overwhelming relief of having a roof over her head and her children safe and fed. Morning brought clear skies and a knock at the door. Virginia, who had slept better than she had in months, opened it to find Wade standing on the porch, his horse loaded with supplies. "Good morning, Mrs. Nelson," he said, hat in hand. "Brought some provisions." Virginia stepped aside to let him enter. "Please call me Virginia." Wade nodded, setting a sack of flour on the table. "Virginia, then." For the next hour, Wade helped her stock the pantry with enough food to last them at least 2 weeks' flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, dried apples, and even a small jar of honey that made the children's eyes widen with delight. "I spoke with Mr. Richardson. He owns the Broken Spoke," Wade explained as they worked. "He says you're welcome to stay here as long as you need, no rent required." Virginia paused in arranging cans on a shelf. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Lawson." "Wade," he corrected gently. "And it's not charity. Mr. Richardson's been looking for someone to help with mending and laundry for the ranch hands. The work wouldn't be too heavy and you could do most of it right here." Virginia considered this. "I'm a fair hand with a needle, and I was taking in laundry back in St. Louis before we came west." "Then it's settled," Wade said with a satisfied nod. "You'll have an income and the ranch will have cleaner shirts. Seems like a fair arrangement to me." Virginia found herself smiling. "Thank you, Wade, truly." Over the following weeks, Virginia settled into a routine. Each morning, Wade or one of the other ranch hands would deliver piles of clothing in need of repair or washing, and she would spend her days sewing torn shirts, darning socks, and scrubbing the red Wyoming soil from denim pants. The work was hard but honest, and the pay, while modest, was enough to feed her family and even set a little aside. Eliza had begun attending the small school in Green River, driven there and back each day by whoever was heading to town from the ranch. Emma and Samuel spent their days playing around the cabin or helping Virginia with small chores. For the first time since Thomas's death, Virginia felt they were building a life rather than merely surviving. Wade visited often, sometimes with ranch business, sometimes just to check on them. He brought small gifts for the children, a wooden horse for Samuel, hair ribbons for the girls, and occasionally stayed for dinner. Virginia found herself looking forward to his visits, planning meals that might tempt him to stay longer, dressing with a little more care on days she expected him. One crisp November afternoon, Wade arrived with a larger package than usual. "Got something for you," he said, setting the bundle on the table. Virginia unwrapped it to find a beautiful woolen shawl in deep burgundy. "Wade, I can't, it's getting colder," he interrupted. "And I noticed your old one is wearing thin. Consider it a business expense, can't have our seamstress catching cold." Virginia ran her fingers over the soft wool. "It's lovely, thank you." Wade shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "There's a social at the church in town this Saturday. Thought you and the children might like to go." He cleared his throat. "I'd be happy to escort you." Virginia looked up, surprised. "A social? Just music and some dancing, potluck supper." Wade's cheeks had reddened slightly. "Thought it might be nice for you to meet some of the other families around here." Virginia hesitated. She hadn't been to any social gatherings since Thomas's funeral. The thought of facing a crowd, of explaining her situation to curious strangers, was daunting. But the hopeful look in Wade's eyes made her pause. I don't have anything suitable to wear to a social," she admitted. Wade's face brightened. "Is that a yes if I can solve that problem?" Despite herself, Virginia laughed. "I suppose it is." The next day, Wade arrived with Mrs. Richardson, the ranch owner's wife, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of the situation. "Wade tells me you're in need of a dress for the social," she announced, carrying a large box into the cabin. "I've brought a few options. My daughter left several behind when she married and moved to Denver. She's about your size, I think." By Saturday evening, Virginia found herself wearing a pretty blue calico dress that Mrs. Richardson had altered to fit her perfectly. Her hair was arranged in a simple but elegant knot, and the burgundy shawl added a touch of color that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. Wade arrived promptly at 6, dressed in his Sunday best, his normally unruly hair slicked back with pomade. He stopped short when Virginia opened the door, staring at her with undisguised admiration. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Virginia felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Lawson." The children were already waiting in the wagon Wade had borrowed for the occasion, excitedly chattering about the social. As he helped Virginia up onto the seat beside him, his hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary, sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. The church hall in Green River was decorated with autumn leaves and candles, creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. A small band played in one corner, and tables laden with food lined the walls. Virginia felt a moment of panic as they entered, conscious of the curious glances directed their way, but Wade's steady presence beside her helped calm her nerves. "Mrs. Nelson, how wonderful to see you," called a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Baker, Eliza's teacher, approaching with a smile. "Eliza has been such a delight in class. You must be so proud of her." Before long, Virginia found herself surrounded by friendly faces, women eager to welcome her to the community. Men nodding respectfully to Wade as if his presence with Virginia and her children was the most natural thing in the world. After dinner, when the band struck up a lively tune, Wade turned to Virginia. "May I have this dance?" Virginia hesitated. "I haven't danced in years." "Neither have I," Wade admitted with a grin. "Reckon we can stumble through it together." And so they did, laughing as they occasionally missed steps or bumped into other couples. Wade's hand was warm and steady at her waist, his movements becoming more confident as the evening progressed. By the time the band played a waltz, they were moving together with surprising grace, as if they'd been dancing partners for years rather than hours. "Thank you for bringing us tonight," Virginia said softly as they swayed to the music. "The children are having a wonderful time." Wade glanced over to where Eliza and Emma were playing a clapping game with some other girls their age, while Samuel had fallen asleep on a bench, his head pillowed on his coat. "I'm glad," Wade said, his voice equally soft. "And you, are you having a good time?" Virginia looked up at him, at the kind eyes that had first offered her shelter on that rainy day, and felt something unfurl in her heart, something she'd thought had died with Thomas. "The best time I've had in longer than I can remember," she answered honestly. The moment was broken by the arrival of Mr. Richardson, who clapped Wade on the shoulder. "Lawson, I need a word with you about that new stock we're expecting from Texas." Wade reluctantly excused himself, promising to return quickly, leaving Virginia to join a group of women who were serving coffee and pie. She found herself drawn into their conversation, grateful for the simple normalcy of discussing recipes and children's antics. "He's sweet on you, you know," said Mrs. Richardson, appearing at Virginia's elbow with a knowing smile. Virginia felt her cheeks warm. "Wade, oh, I don't think, my dear, I've known that boy for 10 years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." The older woman patted her arm. "And it's high time. He's been alone too long." Before Virginia could respond, Wade returned, and the evening continued with more dancing, more conversation, and a growing sense that perhaps her life wasn't over after all, perhaps it was just beginning anew. The ride home was quiet, the children sleeping in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Wyoming sky. Virginia found herself sneaking glances at Wade's profile as he drove, wondering what it would be like to build a life with him. "Penny for your thoughts," Wade said, catching her looking. Virginia smiled. "I was just thinking how different things are now from when you found us in that tent. I never imagined that you'd be going to socials and dancing with a cowboy," Wade finished with a gentle laugh. "That I'd feel hope again," Virginia corrected softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that was the end of everything. I was just trying to keep the children alive." "I couldn't see beyond the next meal, the next night in that leaking tent." Wade was silent for a long moment. "Life has a way of surprising us," he finally said. "When my father died, I thought our family was finished, but my mother, she just kept going, one foot in front of the other." She taught me that strength doesn't always look like what you expect, Virginia nodded. Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, Wade agreed. She'd have liked you. The implication that his mother was no longer living hung in the air between them, another shared experience in a growing list of connections. When they reached the cabin, Wade helped carry the sleeping children inside and tuck them into bed. Virginia stood in the doorway watching him, struck by how natural it felt to have him there, how right. Thank you for tonight, she said as he prepared to leave. For everything. Wade paused on the porch, his hat in his hands. Virginia, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. I'm not good at this sort of thing, but I want you to know that these past weeks, getting to know you and the children, it's been the happiest time I can remember. Virginia's heart quickened. For us too. I don't want to rush you, Wade continued. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and that's as it should be. He was their father and your husband. He took a deep breath. But I hope in time you might consider. That is, I'd like to call on you properly, if you're willing. Virginia looked at this man who had changed their lives so completely, who had offered shelter without hesitation, who treated her children with gentle respect. She thought of how her heart lifted whenever he appeared, how she found herself sharing thoughts with him that she'd never voiced to anyone else. I'd like that very much, she said softly. Wade's face broke into a smile that transformed him. Impulsively, he reached for her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Virginia. Sleep well. Good night, Wade, she whispered, watching as he mounted his horse and rode off into the starlit night. The winter months brought heavy snow and bitter cold, but the foreman's cabin remained warm and secure. Wade visited regularly, sometimes staying for dinner, sometimes just stopping by with supplies or to clear snow from the path. Each visit strengthened the bond between them, building a foundation of trust and affection. By Christmas, it was clear to everyone at the Broken Spoke Ranch that Wade Lawson was courting Virginia Nelson. He brought her family to the ranch's Christmas celebration, proudly introducing her to those ranch hands she hadn't yet met. Mr. Richardson presented each of her children with a gift: a doll for Emma, a pocket knife for Samuel, and a set of watercolor paints for Eliza, while Mrs. Richardson gave Virginia a beautiful hand-sewn quilt, made it special for you, the older woman said with a wink. Thought your cabin could use some brightening up. As winter gradually gave way to spring, Virginia's confidence grew. She had expanded her business beyond the ranch, taking in mending work from townspeople in Green River. The extra income allowed her to purchase new clothes for the growing children and even save a little toward a future that was looking increasingly bright. Wade began teaching Samuel to ride, borrowing a gentle old mare from the ranch for the purpose. He helped Eliza with her schoolwork and patiently braided Emma's hair when Virginia was busy with her sewing. The children, initially cautious around him, now greeted his arrivals with enthusiasm, running to meet him as he rode up to the cabin. One evening in early April, after the children were asleep, Wade and Virginia sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. The air was cool but no longer frigid, carrying the promise of the coming spring. I have something to ask you, Wade said, his voice unusually serious. Virginia turned to look at him, her heart skipping a beat at his expression. What is it? Wade took her hand in his. I've been thinking about the future, about us. So have I, Virginia admitted. Mr. Richardson has offered me a partnership in the ranch, Wade continued. He's getting older, doesn't have any sons, and says he's tired of managing everything himself. It would mean more responsibility, but also a share in the profits, and… He paused. And the big house. Virginia raised her eyebrows. The big house, you mean the main ranch house? Wade nodded. The Richardsons want to move into town, be closer to their daughter who's expecting their first grandchild. They've offered me the house as part of the deal. He squeezed her hand. It's got 5 bedrooms, Virginia, plenty of space for a family. Virginia's breath caught as she realized where this was leading. Wade, I love you, Virginia, he said simply. I think I started falling for you that first day when you stood there protecting your children, ready to face down a stranger rather than show any weakness. He smiled at the memory. You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I've come to love Eliza, Emma, and Samuel as if they were my own. Tears filled Virginia's eyes. "They love you too, we all do." Wade reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "Then I hope you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's. I've been carrying it since Christmas, waiting for the right moment." Virginia looked at the ring, then back at Wade's hopeful face. She thought of the journey that had brought them to this point from desperation in a leaking tent to this moment of profound joy. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you, Wade Lawson." Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a tender kiss there first. When they finally parted, both were smiling through tears. "Should we tell the children?" Wade asked, his forehead resting against hers. Virginia laughed softly. "Let's wait until morning." Though I suspect Eliza at least has been expecting this announcement for some time. The wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the Green River Church, followed by a celebration at the ranch that brought together the entire community. Virginia wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Richardson and several other ranch wives had helped her make, and her daughters carried bouquets of wildflowers they had gathered themselves that morning. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Wade kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of their friends and neighbors. But the moment Virginia treasured most came after, when Wade knelt down to speak to her children. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that I will always care for your mother and for each of you with everything I have. I know I can never replace your father, but I promise to be the best stepfather I can be." 8-year-old Emma flung her arms around his neck. "Can we call you Pa?" she asked. Wade looked up at Virginia, his eyes shining with emotion. "If your mother thinks that would be all right." Virginia nodded, too overcome to speak. Samuel, now 5, stepped forward solemnly. "Pa taught me to ride," he announced to the assembled guests, "and he's going to teach me to rope next." Eliza, approaching 10 and becoming more reserved as she grew older, simply took Wade's hand. "Thank you for taking care of us," she said quietly. The move to the main ranch house was completed by the end of summer. The spacious home, with its wide porch and large kitchen, seemed like a palace compared to the foreman's cabin where they had spent the previous year. Virginia took particular pleasure in the garden, which had been Mrs. Richardson's pride, and now yielded vegetables and flowers in abundance. Wade proved to be as good a husband as he had been a friend and suitor. He worked hard managing the ranch, but always made time for his family, teaching the children to ride and rope, helping Virginia with her expanding sewing business, and ensuring that they all knew they were loved and valued. On the first anniversary of the day Wade had found them in the tent, Virginia prepared a special dinner and sent the children to spend the night with the Richardsons in town. When Wade returned from checking on a distant part of the ranch, he found the house unusually quiet and a table set for 2 with candles and their best dishes. "What's the occasion?" he asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Virginia smiled mysteriously. "Do you know what day it is?" Wade thought for a moment, then his face cleared with understanding. "The day we met, the day I told you you'd sleep under a roof that night. The day everything changed," Virginia agreed, coming to wrap her arms around his waist. "I have something to tell you." Wade looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What is it, love? We're going to need one of those extra bedrooms sooner than we thought," Virginia said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Around February, the doctor thinks." Wade stared at her for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy that probably startled the cattle in the nearby pasture. He lifted Virginia off her feet, spinning her around until they were both laughing breathlessly. "A baby," he said in wonder when he finally set her down. "Our baby." Virginia nodded, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Our family is growing again." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Wade pulled Virginia close against his chest. "Did you ever imagine that day in the tent that things would turn out this way?" he asked softly. Virginia thought back to the desperate woman she had been, trying to shelter her children from wind and rain with nothing but canvas and determination. "Never," she admitted. "I was just trying to survive until the next day, and now." Virginia turned in his arms to face him, tracing the beloved lines of his face with her fingertips. Now I'm not just surviving, I'm living, loving, she smiled. And it all started because a kind cowboy couldn't bear the thought of children sleeping in a tent. Wade kissed her gently. Best decision I ever made, stopping at that tent. As Virginia drifted towards sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, in the home they now shared with her 3 children and the new life growing within her, she silently agreed. From the depths of loss and hardship had come a love and a life more beautiful than she could have imagined, all because one man had seen their need and offered shelter from the storm. From a leaking tent on the windswept plains to the heart of a loving home and family, Virginia's journey had come full circle. And as Wade's steady breathing joined with hers in the peaceful darkness, she knew with absolute certainty that they had found in each other not just shelter for the night, but a home for a lifetime.